With Into the Inklands coming out on February 23rd for Disney's Lorcana, we did see a couple of competitive tournaments occur that were registered on inkdex.com for that release weekend. I think this one in Italy was actually the old meta, but the one in Germany here with 101 players, which is a decent sample size, had an Emerald Amethyst deck take top spot. Now, to be fair, Artabax has had a lot of experience with this deck. He was testing it quite a bit on Pixelborn, so I don't think that this deck may necessarily be the best. I think the player definitely represents a good portion as to why this deck did good. Now, obviously, it's a good player, and he is playing a good deck because he knows what he's doing. So I'm not saying that this deck is bad by any means. I just think that, you see this deck, don't immediately assume that this is what the meta is going to be. But it is definitely a viable option. Obviously, Artabax here took the tournament with 101 players with this deck. A very interesting list, 2 Chernobog's followers. So this card is whenever it quests, you can banish it to draw a card. Very interesting concept of a card to include in a deck, something that you wouldn't think would be very good, but obviously Artabax knows what he's doing and he made it work. 4 Cursed Merfolk. I thought this card would be a little too overhyped, but in the early game, this card definitely puts on a lot of pressure. The reason why this is good is because on turn 1, if you do drop this, you can't let this quest too much before you empty your hand so that it doesn't end up discarding a card. Like, you're going to have to deal with it, which means that, being on turn 1, it's just going to quest for even more lore until you eventually have to deal with it, which is increasing the likelihood that you're going to get an advantage off this card because it's going to mean your opponent has to discard. And in addition to the 6 1-drops that they play, they're also playing 3 Rafiki Mystical Fighter, which is very interesting, but this is a Challenger 3/02 card, but it is inkable and it only costs 1. They're playing 4 Flynn Rider Charming Rogue, the card from set 1 that quests for 2. It's a 1/2 body for 2 and it is inkable. Only 2 Madame M Snake, but also in the 2-drop slot 4 Ursula Deceiver. This card is going to be a very powerful card going into the Inklands meta, simply for the fact that it rips so many powerful cards out of opponents' hands, and almost every single deck plays some variation of songs. Bare Necessities, Friends on the Other Side, Teeth and Ambitions, Be Prepared, Whole New Worlds, Grab Your Swords, you name it, right? I mean, decks are playing them, right? Let the Storm Rage on, Strength of a Raging Fire, etc., and so on and so forth. So this card will have a lot of utility moving into the meta. And even if you don't hit something, just seeing what the opponent is on early on, seeing what they have in their hand, what their lines of play could be. For an experienced player, it can make all the difference in knowing how to play around the interactions that the opponent might have. Or not interactions, because the game isn't really too interactable right now, but the cards, the lines that they're going to play. 4 Cloud Kicker Tough Guy. This card is essentially befuddle on a body almost, right? 2 strength or less back to the player's hand. An extremely good card because Emerald decks care about tempo. They bounce cards back to hand. They don't necessarily care about banishing them or dealing damage to them like Ruby or Steel. Emerald cards focus on bounce. And this card is very, very good. And in combination with this card, if you have your discard pressure like lore people on board, your opponent's going to get their card bounced to hand, and they're going to be behind on tempo, which even puts them further behind to empty their hand, which means they're going to have to deal with these cards and discard if they crash into the Merfolk or the Flynn Rider. 4 Madame M Fox, no surprise there, continues to be a very powerful Amethyst card. I've mentioned many times in my videos that I thought this was the most powerful card in Amethyst from Rise of the Floodborn, and good to see that it still has a place in the meta here. 3 Merlin Crab, relevant because it boosts up all of these lower cost characters to make them much beefier, which means that they can end up taking out a location much easier on the opponent's side. Notice that Rafiki being a Challenger 3 says while challenging. It doesn't say while challenging a character. So while your Rafiki can challenge a location, he'll get +3. If he has a boost from Crab, he'll get an additional +3, I believe, making him a 6/2 body, which will allow him to crash into a location and deal 6 damage to it. So Crab does have some decent utility. Plus, it synergizes with the Mim cards if you happen to have that combination, and you can get additional challengers on your characters. No surprise here, the best legendary Into the Inklands, and might even be the best legendary in the game now, giving Beast Tragic Hero a run for its money in Ursula Deceiver of All. I've covered this in my Emerald Steel deck video. I've covered this in my Market Watch video. I'm not going to go over it here. You play your song for free twice. It's extremely powerful. I shouldn't need to explain it. Still 4 Goat and 4 Rabbit, so these cards continue to be very relevant. The Goat, just an extremely powerful card to close out the game and progress lore progression, and Rabbit is just a 1-card draw engine. You play it, it draws, it leaves play, it draws. You play this card, it represents a draw 2. Extremely powerful card. Rabbit in 4 will be very important moving into the Inklands, I think, because it is one of the strongest draw engines in the game still. 3 Evasive Tinkerbell, so again, just one of the endgame threats, I imagine, and giving evasive to an opposing character could become relevant, right? Beefing up your, or not beefing, but giving your Mim Fox the ability to have evasive could help it take out a mini Surfer, for example, when it quests on turn 4, because if it was played on turn 3, so Tinkerbell can help with that, but also it has evasive and is a 2-quester, so also a good pressure card to put on board to close out the game. 2 Genie, surprising. Very low on the uninkable count, which I really like. 2 Genie, 4 Merfolk, so a total of 6, and then 4 Mother Knows Best, 10 uninkables. This deck is very easy to play on curve, and the Genie here, we all know how good Genie is. Again, Emerald just cares about controlling the board state to a certain degree, and so the more tempo control you have, the more your threats are able to continue to quest and not have to worry about being banished. Gives you that advantage and just maintains control. It is a dicey strategy from what I've seen, but obviously in the hands of a skilled player, which Artifacts definitely is, it can be very powerful. And then 1 Yzma, very interesting tech card, I guess, to just throw in there. Good just spot removal for your opponent, I guess, technically, if you don't have anything else, or you're giving yourself a draw 2, right? I mean, it will give your opponent a draw 2, which you don't want to do usually, but instead of playing 3 Genie and technically being bricked up, having a Yzma there as ink potentially if you draw it early game is also nice. 4 Friends and 4 Mother Knows Best, no need to explain anything there. These are the cards that are meant to synergize with Ursula here, bounce 2 or draw 4. Draw 4 is insane. Like, I can't believe, like, Yu-Gi-Oh players, can you imagine a card that says draw 4? Like, yeah, Pot of Greed times 2, right? And then locations for the Queen's Castle Mirror Chamber. Not only is this card extremely powerful for draw, but being able to gain 2 lore, which is wild, at the beginning of your turn every turn while it has 7 strength. And again, you're bouncing your opponent's cards. Like, it's very hard to out this card in this deck. And one of the main reasons I think that this deck could be very good moving forward is that your tempo control just slows the opponent down long enough that they can't deal with your locations, they can't deal with your questing pressure early on, and that's kind of what this deck does, right? And that's how it was able to close out the game. I'm going to just take a look at, I'm not going to review these other ones, I'm going to look at the red-purple control, because what's interesting here is this deck is more or less very similar to what it was in set 2. The only additions have been Prince Eric, Jim Hawkins, the Madame Medusa, and the location. So if you watch my Ruby Amethyst budget upgrade, I talked about cutting the Ursulas, Power Hungry, the Elsa, the Lady Tremaines, and I talked about cutting them for exactly these cards here, right? So you can see here that this is proving to have some success, and the Jim Hawkins build of this I think is going to be the best version, because I've already explained how good the locations are, and just being able to play those for free gives you a tremendous advantage. Obviously this player came second, so you know they know what they were doing with this deck. Only 3 Be Prepareds, which is interesting. Still with the 4 Rabbit, the 2 Eric, so that's 6 uninkables, 9 uninkables, 12 uninkables, 14 uninkables, right? So still a pretty standard ratio from the previous set. The only difference is you're playing lower to the ground with this deck now, which is very interesting to see. The only other deck I think I might take a look at, okay, let's take a look at the Jafar deck here. 2 Fire the Cannons, very interesting. 4 Robin Hood 1-drop, 4 Blue Fairy, so they're playing a Floodborn focused version. I posted a deck about this right at the start of Rise of the Floodborn's release, talking about using like Blue Fairy and stuff to draw cards. It's pretty good, so nice to see the opponent utilizing it here. 3 of the small Jafar, 2 Crab, 3 Tinkerbell. Not sure how I feel about Tinkerbell, the tiny one. I think, you know, you lose a card, like Zach Bevins explained this, like you lose this card when you shift, and it just doesn't provide you enough advantage, whereas like the Robin Hood shift does, because early game it makes sense to shift it because you get a good advantage off of that Robin Hood. And Tinkerbell, I guess you technically could get an advantage off as well, but it's just a little more underwhelming in this case. 4 Jafar Dreadnought, which is very interesting. only 2 Rabbit, but because you have 4 Beast Tragic Hero, you have 4 Robin Hood Champion of Sherwood, 4 Big Tink, 3 Yzma, Scary Beyond All Reason, and 4 Jafar Striking Illusionist, and then your songs are very plentiful, so this deck just gets ripped apart by Ursula, right, the Deceiver. 4 Friends, 2 Strength, 4 Zeus, wow, 4 Whole New World, and 3 Grab Your Swords. In the song count alone, that's 11 on Inkables, and then you play 2 Rabbits for 13, 2 Fire the Cannons for 15 on Inkables. So, interesting deck list. I do want to check out the Ruby Amber here, because I imagine, they're not on the Chernobog. That's interesting. Okay. I do have a video coming, or matches coming, with a very interesting Ruby Amethyst list. I played against one of the top players on the leaderboard, Luffy, and I almost won, but I think he had game. He knew he had game like a turn or two ago because the cards in his hand and the way he set up his board with the Chernobog being played for free, and then like I think it was like a Tremaine or something, was very, very nice. And so I took his kind of deck and decided to build something around it. Green Fassa still out here doing some stuff. There's a Chernobog in that one, utilizing the Plutos. Interesting. You can utilize the Deceiver, but you can't really play the Deceiver of All, obviously, because you don't play songs. And then an Amber Steel song list. What have they opted to tech into their deck that's new here? Chernobog, okay. I'm playing 4 Cinderella, very interesting. 2 I guess. Of course, Bare Necessities. I don't know why you wouldn't play 4 of this card. I mean, it's ink at the worst, and like ripping any non-character card out of your opponent's hand, that's pretty good. And then Zeus, 3 copies, okay. Very high on the uninkable count, right? 11, 15, 17, 18 uninkables, wow. But that's going to round out that tournament, the best sample size you can get. Pretty diverse, right? 2 Emerald Amethyst, 2 Ruby Amethyst. So still 1 Amethyst Steel. So still 5 decks that are Amethyst focused. Tells you how strong that is. And all the Amber decks kind of fell towards the bottom of the top 8 here. But then 1 Steel Song, 1 Emerald Amber Mufasa, and 1 Ruby Amber Mufasa as well. So that's going to round out the biggest tournament. Let me know in the comment section below if you enjoyed these kind of tournament review videos. Let me know what you think of the meta evolving over the next couple weeks, and we'll see how things shape up. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not already to see more gameplay content as we explore many decks and many concepts in the Into the Inklands meta. Thank you again for watching. If you made it this far, Quantum is out.